to government class. In today's government class, we'll be looking at the nature and the structure of Nigeria's federalism. Nigeria's federalism is known for a peculiar structure which were originated from the British system of government. The structure of Nigeria's federalism could be discussed in the following ways: the federalism before independence, the federalism between 1960 and 1966, the federalism between 1967 to 1975, and Nigeria's federalism from 1976 till date. The structure of Nigeria's federalism before independence. Initially, Nigeria as a nation was exposed to a kind of centralized system of political arrangement, which was unitary in nature. So before, Nigeria was administered as a whole unit. It was not administered by regions. It was administered as a whole unit. This was because most of the political powers were concentrated in the central government, who were then the British colonial masters. An attempt was made to introduce federalism in the country when the amalgamation of northern and southern protectorates of the country took place in 1914 by Lord Lugard. So that was the first attempt at a federal system of government in Nigeria, when Sir Lugard amalgamated the northern and the southern protectorates of Nigeria together to form the colony and protectorate of Nigeria. The two protectorates were not seen as autonomous units, therefore the amalgamation was not a true federalism. So after amalgamating the northern and the southern protectorates of Nigeria together, they were not seen as autonomous units. They were not seen as southern region, northern region, or southern, or anything of that sort. They were seen as a units together. So because the two protectorates were not seen as autonomous units after the amalgamation was not a true federalism. In 1922, Cliffords Constitution was introduced for the first time, and the two protectorates were changed to provinces. So before the introduction of Cliffords Constitution, Nigeria was administered as a unit, as a whole. The southern protectorates were not seen as a unit of their own. The northern protectorate was not seen as a unit of its own. They were seen together as a nation together. They were seen as a nation. The two were seen as a unit. So before Cliffords Constitution, Nigeria was administered as a whole unit, regardless of as a whole unit after the amalgamation. But with the coming of Cliffords Constitution, it introduced for the first time when Cliffords Constitution was introduced, for the first time, the two protectorates were changed to provinces. They were changed to provinces. But before the emergence of Richard's Constitution of 1946, the two new provinces were split into three. They were split into three regions They were split into three provinces in 1939. The southern province was split into the eastern and the western province, thereby creating a form of near federalism in the country with northern, western, and eastern provinces. So what we had before 1922 was that Nigeria was administered as a whole unit. Then with the coming of Cliffords Constitution, the two protectorates were changed to provinces. And then before the emergence of Richard's Constitution, that is during the time when Sir Bodleian was the governor or governor general of Nigeria, the northern and southern province. The southern province was then divided into the eastern province and the western province, making room for three provinces in Nigeria. And this was one of the things that led the pathway for federalism in Nigeria. Before the Richard's Constitution came up, Governor Bodleian made a recommendation that the three provinces should be made regions so as to create more effect of federalism in the country. So even after dividing the country into provinces, Sir Bodleian recommended that the three provinces should be made regions so as to create more effect of federalism in the country by making them regions, by making the provinces regions. In 1946, Arthur Richard introduced a new constitution, which is Richard's Constitution of 1946. The constitution approved the creation of region, which was one of the recommendations that were initially made by Sir Bodleian in 1939. And these recommendations were finally approved, and there was a creation of three regions out of the three provinces. Although the three regions were created without clear division of powers between the central government and the regional unit. So one of the main characteristics of the federal system of government is that there's clear separation of power between the central government and the regional units. So although this paved the way for federalism in Nigeria, it was not true federalism. It was the Macpherson's Constitution of 1951 that actually changed the shade of the country's quasi-federalism by creating two legislative houses at the central and the regional units. It was not until Macpherson's Constitution of 1951 that the quasi-federalism we had been practicing in Nigeria was changed towards true federalism. Although it was still not true federalism, it paved more paths for true federalism in Nigeria. So Macpherson's Constitution created two legislative houses, one for the central government and one for the regional unit. So the central government had what we call the House of Representatives, and the regional government had the House of Assembly. A House of Representatives was established to enact laws for the entire country, while the House of Assembly was established to make law for the regions. This was the first time in which there was clear division of legislative powers. This was the first time in which clear legislative division of power was introduced in the Constitution. It was Macpherson's Constitution that first introduced clear division of power between the central government and the regional units. This was the first constitution that showed a clear division of power between the central government and the regional units. So it was moving towards the path of true federalism, but it still was not true federalism, because although the regions had their own regional legislative councils, House of Assembly, they could only legislate on issues. They could not make laws. So they could only discuss on legislations. They could not make laws. The power to make law was still vested on the central government. So when they made decisions, the federal government had the power to approve or disapprove of those decisions they came through, or the bills they made. So it was still not true federalism, but it was still towards the path of true federalism. The 1953 London Constitutional Conference and the emergence of the LearnCity's Constitution were the actual steps that brought true federalism into the country. So it was the 1953 London Constitutional Conference and the emergence of the LearnCity's Constitution that actually brought what we call true federalism into the country. It was until then that the powers of the central government and the state government were separated, that the regional governments became an autonomous unit of their own. They could make laws, they could legislate by themselves. The outcome asserted that Nigerian constitution should be redrawn so as to provide for greater regional autonomy and for removal of powers of intervention by the central government under the federal system of government. So one of the decisions that were made at the 1953 London Constitutional Conference, which birthed what we call the LearnCity's Constitution, was that the constitution should be redrawn so as to provide for greater regional autonomy. That is, the region should not have any attachment with the central government again, such as waiting for the central government to approve before they can make laws and all. They should be able to legislate and implement issues on their own. So that was one of the decisions that were made at the London Constitutional Conference that bettered what we call the LearnCity's Constitution. It was to provide for greater regional autonomy and for the removals of powers of intervention by the central government from the regional unit. So another decision that was made was that the federal government or the central government should not be able to interfere or intervene in the affairs of the regional unit. The regional unit should be autonomous. They should have their own autonomy. They should be independent. So this was another recommendation or decision that was made at the London Constitutional Conference. The Constitution actually portrayed true federalism by granting federating units, the regional units, autonomy, whereby directives will no longer be received from the central government. So it was the LearnCity's Constitution that showed what we call true federalism, because it granted the federating units, which we call the regions, then autonomy, so that they would no longer have to receive directives from the central government anymore. So they were independent, they were able to stand on their own, they were able to make laws and implement policies by themselves and for themselves. There was clear division of power into exclusive. Exclusive those are the areas where only the federal government and only the state governments can legislate on respectively, is not the same. There are areas exclusive means is only exclusive to the federal government or is only exclusive to the regional government. So there was clear division of power into exclusive, concurrent, and residual lists. Exclusive lists are lists that only the central government could legislate, on. Concurrent lists are lists that both the central government and the regional government could legislate on. And residual lists are lists that only the regional government could legislate on. The central government was empowered to legislate solely on the executive list. So the central government can only legislate solely on things that were included in the exclusive list. The concurrent legislative lists were exercised by both the central government and the regional units, while the regional units were given the residual legislative list to legislate on. So items under the concurrent legislative list could be exercised by both the central government and the regional units, while the regional units were given power solely to legislate on the residual legislative list. This constitution also created room for the office of the Premier, which was later known as the office of the Prime Minister in 1957. And with this, we've come to the end of this class. In the course of this class, we looked at the nature and the structure of Nigeria's federalism before independence. In the next class, we'll be looking at the structure of Nigeria's federalism from 1960 to 1966. And I'll see you at the next class.